Right now, remarks from this morning from South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. He called on President Trump to hold the man accused of running over bicyclists in New York City yesterday as an enemy combatant. Remarks now from South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham earlier today about the terrorist attack that took place yesterday in New York City.
Folks there. Y'all ready? Yeah. I think the recent event in New York is not only heartbreaking, and my thoughts and prayers, like everyone else, is with the victims of this terrible attack. Many of them were visiting our country from abroad, and it is really, truly heartbreaking. And I've heard a lot of platitudes about how strong we are and what we're going to do as a nation. We're not going to give in. That's all great. People in New York are extremely strong, and the New York City attitude toward this is probably the right attitude to take, which is to plow on. But the one thing I want to make sure of is that the American people understand that we're making the right policy choices. It's not enough for a politician to give platitudes about what happened. We actually need to look and see if our laws are sufficient to meet the threats. So I believe very deeply that this gentleman, Mr. Sapoff, I think is his name, should be held as an enemy combatant under the law of war. The reason I say that is that there's ample evidence to suggest that these attacks were motivated by radical Islamic thought, that he killed in the name of radical Islam, and that he is expressing his allegiance to ISIL, that he is acting as a soldier of the caliphate, and we should treat him as a soldier of the caliphate. The one thing about the war that's changing is that the enemy no longer is organized in groups. They're soliciting people in our own country and abroad to come to their cause through the internet. And it's important for the American people to understand that in moments like this, the goal is to gather intelligence, not to convict him in a court of law. I don't think it's going to be very difficult to convict this man in a court of law, but he'll have his day in court. And because he's a green card holder, he cannot be tried by military tribunals. I actually authored the Military Commission Act. Citizens and green card holders are ineligible for trial through military tribunals, so he will have to go to Article III court. But that's not the issue. The question for us now is, what's the best way to gather intelligence from this man? Under the law of war, an enemy combatant is not entitled to Miranda rights or to be represented by counsel when the interrogation process is designed to gather intelligence. The difference between the law of war and criminal law is pretty basic. Under criminal law, the goal is to dispose of a crime, giving the defendant due process and adequate opportunity for the victim to be heard. You have a prosecutor, you have a defense attorney, you'll have a jury. And their goal is to find out whether or not the prosecution can meet the elements of a crime. Since we're at war, which I believe we are, when you find somebody associated with radical Islam who takes up their cause and kills in the name of radical Islam, what we should try to find out about that person is, how did you get here? Are you working with other people? And under the law of war, I've been a military lawyer for 33 years, we have the authority in the United States to detain this man as an unlawful enemy combatant. Within 30 to 60 days, he will have a right to appear before a federal judge. The government would have to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that he is in fact associated with radical Islam. And I think it should be conduct-based, not status-based. If you take up arms against the United States in the name of radical Islam, you should be treated as a terrorist. If you kill in the name of radical Islam, you should be treated as a terrorist, held initially under the law of war as an unlawful enemy combatant. You'll never convince me that the best way to gather intelligence in this war, which is now in our backyard, is to read somebody their Miranda rights, telling them they have the right to remain silent and are entitled to legal representation. Under the law of war, you can interrogate an unlawful enemy combatant without limitation on time. You have to treat them compliant with the Geneva Convention, the Detainee Treatment Act. You can't torture them, nor should you, but time can be used as an interrogation tool itself. So what I hope the Trump administration will do is break from the Obama administration's view that all terrorists are common criminals. The law does allow you to treat a terrorist differently than a common criminal. Declaring this man as an unlawful enemy combatant would allow the government to hold him, and it doesn't have to be at Gitmo, for the purpose of gathering intelligence, compliant with the Geneva Convention, the Detainee Treatment Act, and the mere passage of time can be a good interrogation tool. General Mattis said the best way to find out information from enemy prisoners is over time get to know them, and sometimes it may be a cigarette, maybe a cold beer, but over time you form a relationship, and time itself works as a good interrogation technique, not torture, but time. The moment you read somebody their Miranda rights, there is an impediment to the interrogation. You can no longer interrogate the person under the law of war. So what I would suggest the administration do is in the initial phase, look at the evidence associating this man with radical Islamic terrorism thought, look at him as an unlawful enemy combatant, take the time you need to develop who he is and what he did and why, be ready to present, if necessary, to a federal judge your case against him as being an unlawful enemy combatant. But if you determine in the next few days that he doesn't fit, this is not the right fit for this man, then you can go back to the criminal process. But in the initial interrogation phase of this case and every other case like this, we should go into this based on evidence we have before us, assuming this man did this as part of a radical Islamic terrorist movement, and hold him under the law of war until we can get a good readout on who he is. In this case, he cannot be tried at Gitmo. You don't have to hold him at Gitmo, but you could if you wanted to, if in fact he is an unlawful enemy combatant. For the last 8 years, we've been taking every case like this, and within days reading the Miranda rights and turning this activity into a criminal case rather than a terrorism case. So I hope the Trump administration will take this opportunity to break from the last 8 years and apply the law of war which is available to them so they can gather intelligence from this gentleman about who he is and what he did and where he's connected, if at all, and make a rational decision about how to go forward. If we go back to the criminal model, then we're losing valuable intelligence. And the one thing I can say about making America safe, if somebody's willing to die and take you with them, it's really difficult. But the best way to stop attacks like this is to use good intelligence, get involved in these groups, have vetting before people like this get here, and sometimes you're just going to make mistakes. But once you capture somebody like this man or the son-in-law of bin Laden, the last thing I think you want to do is lawyer them up, put them in the federal court, where you really can't have the time to interrogate them under the law of war. The fact that we took bin Laden's son-in-law off the battlefield and gave him a lawyer and started plea bargaining was a huge mistake in the past administration. Plea bargaining is not the best way to gather intelligence. I've been a military lawyer for 33 years. There's nothing in military law that suggests that criminalizing a enemy prisoner, giving them criminal rights, rather than intelligence gathering, is the best way to find out about enemy operations. So I will end with this. I believe we're at war. I believe the war is changing. I believe the enemy is changing their tactics, that rather than recruiting people just from the Mideast, they're using the internet and other opportunities to convert people to their cause in our own backyard. And when we catch somebody like this, we need to slow down and make sure we're making good decisions in terms of gathering intelligence to prevent the next attack, and to make sure that we can find everything within reason about what this guy's up to and what got him to the event of yesterday so that we can make America safer. I talked to the president last night about this. I think he's inclined to be aggressive, at least I hope he is. I talked to the Attorney General yesterday about the man in Libya. So the Trump administration has an opportunity here to change policy, and I hope they will do so.
Senator Graham, Senator, what about the idea that, there's been a lot of talk the past few days around here about a new AUMF.
Right.
And to this point, you said, well, we're at war. If there is consternation as to under what premise the U.S. is at war and where and how could you hold this person who commits an act of terror on American soil as an enemy combatant if it's unclear as to what is the military authority overseas that the U.S. is fighting?
Well, number one, I would argue that the Homeland is the ultimate prize for the enemy. That if you had a system that if a terrorist could make it to our homeland, they're no longer considered an enemy combatant, you're rewarding bad behavior. The idea that America is not part of the battlefield is insane. Tell that to people who are in the Twin Towers. Tell that to people in the Pentagon. Tell that to people in Boston. Tell that to people in New York. This is where they want to come above every other place in the world. The ultimate jihadist prize is to attack us in our own backyard. So the Constitution is not a suicide pact. We have a rule of law in place that covers situations like this. It's called the law of armed conflict. The war is global. The prime target for the jihadists is to hit us in our own backyard. That's the gold medal in jihadist Olympics, is to carry out a terrorist attack in our own backyard. When you find somebody who's been converted to their cause, whether it's through the internet or a visit overseas, whatever reason, then we should hold them under the law of war, interrogate them to gather intelligence to make sure we can prevent another attack if one's being planned, but to understand how the enemy is operating. I am 100% convinced if you criminalize this war in the future, you're going to make America less safe.
Senator, why is it appropriate for you and for the president to come out the day after a terrorist attack by truck and say we need to change policies and laws, but when Democrats come out after a mass shooting and say we need to change laws about guns, that's inappropriate and too soon?
All I'm saying is I've been talking about this for 15 years. The worst critic of Lindsey Graham can't say that I'm new to the dance. Every time we've had a terrorist attack with somebody like this, I've been saying the same thing. Hold them as an unlawful enemy combatant to gather intelligence. Don't read them their Miranda right. It's not too soon. We should have done this years ago. Slowly but surely over time, we've taken the war and turned it into a crime. So this is not about gun control. It is not about truck control. It is about finding out how the enemy operates. This man, let me just say this. If you act like a terrorist and you say you're a terrorist, that's enough for me. We ought to treat you as a terrorist. And the difference between a terrorist under the law of war and somebody who commits a common crime is night and day. Under the law of war, we have the opportunity to gather intelligence. Under the criminal law, you can't. You can't hold somebody under criminal law and ask them a bunch of questions about who you are and what you did that could implicate them in a crime. But under the law of war, you can ask an enemy prisoner, what did you do and how did you do it, to make sure that the country is safe. So I don't think there's a double standard here on my part. The idea, this is not a gun control issue. This is not an immigration issue. Now, what I would say about immigration, yes, we should be looking long and hard at who comes into our country from areas where radical Islam is a problem. You can't ban somebody because of their religious affiliation, but you can't hide behind your religion either. If somebody has, through the social media outlets or through evidence we can collect, shown a radicalization tendency, then we can say no. But some people will come here and change. The law needs to be able to adapt to the enemy as the enemy changes. So this is not an immigration issue for me. It's one part of it, but my point here today is to tell the American people, if we don't gather good intelligence, it's hard to stop this.
Senator, does that mean that you do not agree with the president that there needs to be a look at this diversity lottery visa?
No, I agree with that. I agree that, well, the Gang of Eight eliminated the lottery system. So we eliminated that a long time ago, but the bill didn't pass. So if we do something for the DREAM Act kids, which I'd like to do, one of the things we should do is eliminate the lottery. We should go to a merit-based immigration system. That's a different issue. When it comes to granting visas to people from dicey areas, I think it's perfectly okay to look long and hard at people who come from those areas, not ban them because of their faith, but realize we're at war and parts of the world are now basically lawless, and there is no way to vet completely in some of these countries. So it's not about Uzbekistan or Libya. To me, it's about a profile. We should make sure that we're looking at the right people.
Senator Graham, on a different subject, the Navy put out a report today saying that the sailors in the USS Fitzgerald crash lacked the basic knowledge about the radar use and fundamentals about international rules of the nautical road in this crash.
Right.
What do you think needs to happen, and what's your reaction to the idea that these sailors didn't know what they were doing, basically?
Well, I think it's a logical consequence of cutting the budget for a very long period of time where training suffers. The operational tempo has been very high. When you have limited resources, we cut $1 trillion out of the defense budget, and you've had people who've been grounded, the planes have been grounded because the pilots can't fly enough. I'm sure, you know, the resources the Navy has have been diverted to operational needs. That's just one plausible explanation. 44 people have died in training accidents versus a dozen or so killed in combat. I think Senator McCain and I would say that sequestration has gutted the military's ability to be ready and to be proficient, and that all of us in Congress bear some blame for putting the military in this bad situation.
Senator, can I ask you two questions? First, what is the current status, as you understand it, as to where this decision is by the government in terms of suspect?
This is why I'm here. I don't know.
Okay.
So I'm here to give my 2 cents worth about what we should be looking at. So if you believe the media reports, and it seems to be pretty clear that this man was expressing allegiance to radical Islamic thought, that there's evidence, ample evidence to suggest it may in fact been an unlawful enemy combatant. So the FBI and other intelligence organizations have a high-value interrogation team. Here's what I hope they're doing. I hope they're looking at the evidence to suggest whether or not this was an act of terrorism rather than a common crime, and that they would consider this man an unlawful enemy combatant, at least initially, so they could go in and talk to him. He may be gleeful today. That's what CBS says. I have no idea. But a year from now, he may be less gleeful. So what I would suggest is to have a process of where the FBI and other intelligence organizations can go in and have access to this man on their terms, as long as it takes to find out what he did and why he did it from an intelligence point of view. And if they read him his Miranda rights first, it gets to be very difficult to do what I'm talking about.
And can I just a second question is,
Yeah.
The president woke up this morning and tweeted about Chuck Schumer
Yeah.
and the visa diversity program. It looks like he got a lot of his facts wrong. And
Yeah.
I just want to know your opinion. Did he squander an opportunity here and decide to go political at a time when he should have been trying to bring the country together?
Well, number one, Senator Schumer has supported legislation to do away with the lottery system. That was the game debate bill. I was there, I know. It didn't pass. Apparently, this man came in through the lottery system. So all I would say to the president is that count me in for wanting to eliminate the lottery system for merit-based immigration. But Mr. President, the real decision you have to make in real time is not about changing the lottery system, which is a legislative endeavor that will take time, is are you as Commander-in-Chief going to invoke your power, your administration's power to declare this man as an unlawful enemy combatant initially and gather intelligence versus reading him his Miranda rights?
Whether or not to get political, and he decided
Well,
to get political, and that's what I'm asking about.
Yeah, I just think the president wants immigration reform, count me in. I know what Senator Schumer was willing to do with the lottery. He was willing to change it. I'm here today not to talk about how to reform immigration. In the next 12 hours probably, they're going to have to make a decision that's going to either continue a practice I think makes America less safe, or they're going to adjust their policies. I'm here to urge the president to reject the Obama approach to fighting the war on terror. He criminalized the war, Mr. President. You need to treat it as war.
Do you see this case in the same way that you see the U.S. citizen that's suspected of fighting for ISIS that's been held in DoD custody in Iraq for now 7 weeks? I mean, even 7 weeks in, you know, is there any point at which he should be turned over to?
Okay. Here's the way the law works. If the government declares somebody in our custody to be an unlawful enemy combatant, they have a right to appear before a federal judge to have a habeas hearing. Then the government has to prove by preponderance of the evidence this person is in fact an unlawful enemy combatant. The gentleman in Iraq, I don't know whose custody he's in.
He's still in DoD custody.
Okay, if he's in DoD's custody, then they have to make a decision fairly soon, I think within 60 days, as to whether or not they want to declare this person an unlawful enemy combatant. If he's captured overseas, they can bring him back into the country. They have to have this hearing. You can't hold someone indefinitely as an unlawful enemy combatant without judicial review. The judicial review has to happen really within about 60 days.
As this New York attack was happening, you were chairing a hearing with social media companies, and we heard from experts about the role social media companies have in online radicalization.
Right.
So how are you thinking about that in this case, and then also with regard to intelligence gathering?
Okay, so what did we learn yesterday? That the terrorists are encouraging their followers to use Twitter, Facebook, and other social media outlets to get their message out. They use these platforms to recruit people. They use these platforms to spread their ideology. The social media companies involved yesterday have a fairly sophisticated artificial intelligence effort to shut down jihadist websites, but nothing's perfect. There is no law in this area. You're in the media business. If you're in radio and broadcast, you're highly regulated. Social media outlets are not regulated at all. Why are the terrorists going to this form of communication? There's the dark internet where it's encrypted, the Telegram websites where they can talk to each other without us finding out about what they're talking about. So I think it's very ironic that as we were having a hearing about how radical Islam is using the internet to recruit in our own backyard, within the time frame of the hearing you had an attack by somebody who seems to fit that profile. And all I'm saying is that we're at war. I believe in civil liberties. I believe in constitutional principles. I've been a military lawyer for 33 years. Torture does not work. I reject torture as a technique. I believe in the rule of law, but I also believe in making America safe within reason. And right now, the internet and social media outlets are ungoverned space just as much as Africa is ungoverned. The terrorists go to ungoverned spaces on the ground. They're going to ungoverned spaces in cyber, and they're using the cyber ungoverned spaces to generate attacks against us. All I can say is the war is coming to our backyard. It is here. The enemy has a recruiting technique to radicalize people within our country. There's going to be more of this, not less. And the more information we can find about how these guys get to where they are, the better off we are. And the less we criminalize the war, the safer we'll be. Thank you.
Thank you.